My name is Jessica Lord, and so before DIY and before I moved to California a year ago, actually, I was an architect and urban designer for the city of Boston, and that's what I've done for most of my time. But I was joking earlier, and then I kind of realized it was true that I moved out here a year ago to do, well, here being California and not the East Coast, to do Code for America, and it was my first time out here, and it was a total dive into the deep end of the tech world of the Bay Area and all of this stuff. And since then, with just like months under my belt of programming, like, you know, I gave talks and talked about projects and programming things, but I spent way more time being an architect and urban designer. But as I'm not 50 and a white male, like, I've never been asked to speak about cities, so this is the first time I've talked about cities, which I do care a lot about. So that is the background. I've been torn about where to start, but my senior year in architecture school was a study abroad program, and I had this professor who totally shifted me from architecture into urban design. And because one of the things he challenged us to do was measure the city with our body, to go around and understand how spaces were working or not working, and then make notes and observations about how that space related to our body. Like, measure with your feet the side of the sidewalk that didn't work or the size of the sidewalk that did work. And he called that the rules of thumb, and to sort of be thinking about spaces that way. And he also said something that just, it's burned in my head, and it is that every trip begins and ends with walking. And so no matter kind of what technology we have or how technology changes, like whether our cars drive on roads today or they float in the air later, like, we have to walk to that car, right? So what happens when our cities aren't designed for walking, right? Which is the inevitable thing that we're always going to be doing at some point. And especially what happens during times when those technologies don't exist, like when gas goes away or becomes too expensive to use. If we don't have our feet to fall back on, what happens when cities aren't designed basically for people? And so that's something I'm always thinking about. And I recently read a book by E.O. Wilson, who is, I guess, a scientist who, he writes about a lot of other things, but he knows a lot about ants and social creatures. But he wrote this awesome book called The Social Conquest of Earth. And as I read it, so many things sounded to me like cities. And he talks about the evolution of mankind, but it sounded to me like cities and culture today. And so I'm embarking on this talk about the future of cities, knowing also that everyone who talks about the future of cities is wrong. Like, everyone looks back on those things and laughs because it was ridiculous. So I'll probably be wrong, but I will, like those people, be optimistic and idealistic in what I say. But I think I will differ in that I think a lot of predictions of the future look at technology and they say what technology might be possible, and then they mold what they predict our lives to be around that technology. And to me, I think the future will be more about people and not technology, and that the future looks more like the past and sort of what people and humans have always been. And so in this book by E.O. Wilson, he talks about how humans are what we are today, the dominant species on Earth, not because we had larger brains and could solve complex problems, but because we were social. Because ever since the dawn of time, we've been in small groups of people, and it's been essential to our survival to be around people, to be able to read people and understand people and manipulate people and try and guess what their intentions are. And all of this has led to the success of our evolution. And so I think that sort of core humanness will shape the future of cities more than any specific technology. So I have some notes because I knew this would happen. So cities are places where we get to be with people, right? And so cities are the places that conjure up all of these really, really old and traditional and forever inherent things in us about being able to see people and understand people. Cities put us in subways and sidewalks with all kinds of conditions of the human race. We have an understanding of what the human race is like, and cities make it really, really easy to transfer ideas, and a lot of ideas happen in cities. And so for this to be true, though, cities have to be for people. And so I think you see this in a lot of older cities, right? Cities that weren't designed around any particular technology, because maybe you know about some cities that are designed around a particular technology, like the automobile. And so there's a major difference. There's another guy, and maybe I'm jumping around, and sorry, Kevin Lynch, who is my favorite urbanist, but he talks about how cities are, every single thing about a city is a human-made decision, and every human-made decision is connected to a value statement, right? Because when you decide to build a highway, you're placing a value on the need to move cars really, really quickly. And so you can look at cities today and derive from that, like, what were the values of that city and the people making decisions in that city. And I think / hope that the future of cities will be more about the value in our humanness and our needing to be with people. And when you think about cities that were started a long, long time ago, like, they weren't built for technology. They were built because at some point we stopped moving on and we started moving around in one place, right? And we had to trade goods and make goods and store goods and defend goods. And so cities were shaped by decisions based on these type of things, and technology enabled things, but for a long time it didn't dictate what cities looked like. And so basically, in my prediction of the future of cities, it's going to be that cities will be more about people, and technology will aid in that, but it won't dictate it, because I hope that we'll get proven over and over that we can't escape our humanness. And when you think about things like smartphones now, like, if you are going to catch your bus, you know exactly when that bus is coming because there's something in your hand that tells you the bus is about to come. But you could still actually miss that bus unless someone on the bus sees you running for it, empathizes, and says, stop and wait for that person, right? And so in so many cases, it's really hard to absolutely remove that human element from the way we interact in cities. And so there are a lot of awesome people out there who are trying to do just that. Enrique Peñalosa was the former mayor of Bogota and sort of a saint, I think, in terms of championing people. And he speaks a lot about social justice in cities, right? That when you walk the streets of your city, you should not, if you are walking or riding a bike, you should feel just as valuable as the person who's driving a car. And cities should be designed that way, right? With no one mode dominating over another. And he and other people use cities to test ideas, which is, I think, another thing that cities have to continue to be in the future, is they have to be adaptable. So a building that was great for 18th century manufacturing needs to be great for 21st century hydroponics, right? And buildings that are designed for one really specific use are the empty big boxes in a lot of the suburbs now. And cities need to be places where we can play with the space and do things like Broadway in New York City, where they changed all the lines in the road and made a pedestrian space in the middle of the road. And they started it saying it's going to be temporary, right? And then it worked really great, and then you can keep it. And that's something that needs to be done, because everything else takes a really, really long time to happen in cities, unfortunately, and it's really frustrating. But the cities have to be adaptable. Oh, yeah. So, so technology is going to continue to evolve, and we're going to continue to have technology that will enable us to do awesome things. But going back to never being able to strip ourselves from our humanness, we actually don't need to be the most efficient we can be, and we don't need to be automated all the time. Really wide roads and highways are really efficient for cars, but they're scary for people to cross. They make the people inside the cars really angry, and you can actually be a healthier and happier person if you're not on that super efficient thing, right? And if you are walking instead of driving to dinner and you bump into somebody or you see a poster for something, there are all these tiny moments that can happen in your life that can't happen otherwise. And so it's really beneficial to not be as efficient as you could possibly be. And with automation, we have things like traffic lights that are deciding for us when it's okay to go and when it's not okay to go. And then we get really adjusted to doing that and obeying the traffic lights and what they say to do. And there are places in Europe, and I'm going to really butcher this name because I don't speak Dutch, but it's Vonnerfs. But there are places where they remove the traffic lights, they remove traffic signs, and in some cases they removed sidewalks, and there's no delineation between space. And so that removed it down to humans having to interact with humans to decide what was appropriate. And it's actually become immensely safer because humans are doing what humans are actually really, really, really good at, which is being with people. And so I think that that will continue to be the case, that we will have technology that changes and changes and changes. But just because we can do it doesn't always mean we need to do it. We'll be able to build skyscrapers into the sky with carbon fiber, but then we'll be creating, vertical suburbs, and that's not what we need to do. And there's always going to be a happy medium of creating a safe, earthquake-resistant space, but that also keeps the streets a really happy place to be too. And I also don't think that the future will be all about cities. I think sometimes the grand vision of the future is that we'll all live in these giant New York City type of cities. And I think that that doesn't have to be true, and it's a great place for people during certain times of their life when that makes sense for them. But I think you can live outside the city, and that can be a perfectly fine, sustainable place to live. But what's happened in the last 50 years is that everyone who moved to the suburbs was still really dependent on the city for work, for groceries, for social interaction. And what will change is that there will be this sliding scale of the city is a pool of shared resources. We can share the way we get to work, and we can share restaurants, and we can share whatever. But the further you move from the city, the more you do yourself, right? You may have a few animals and some crops, and you don't need to go to the city every day. And you can probably work from home because there's this thing called the internet, and the internet is going to be, I think, well, it is, whatever. The internet is awesome. And it's going to... All right, I'll have another E.O. Wilson quote that, that I know I'm not going to say right, but this is from the same book, The Social Conquest of Earth, but he talks about how when any one innovation is adopted, it makes possible the next adoption of the next innovation, which makes possible the next adoption, and then it happens faster and faster and faster. And then the groups that are able to roll with this and accept these changes are the ones that end up dominating, and the other groups are the ones that either try to copy it or fall behind. And in that section, he's actually talking about a period in time 60,000 to 50,000 years ago, and to me it was just so remarkable how it sounded like my life in San Francisco in the last year. And I think that goes back to how you can't remove what is human about us. And we're at this remarkable time, I think, having spent some time in city government and in San Francisco now, where we have more capacity to do more with information than our government does. And we can actually collect the data, make meaningful connections with it, and visualize it more than our government can. And that gives us an immense power, and we are that group that's ready to adopt and ready to change, and that's seeing something and innovating on that thing and then innovating on the next thing. And government is the one that's behind, and that is becoming less relevant, I think. But I think that's incredible, because I think it gives the people this incredible power to do things themselves. And we now have, with crowdfunding and just every social network, we have the capacity to organize ourselves together, to fund things together, and to actually just get together and build things in real life. And people want to do that because people love people. And so this last year that I've dove into all that is the San Francisco Bay Area, a lot of my friends are nerds now, which is fine, and I'm a nerd or else I wouldn't be out here. But they spend a ton of time in front of computers, and they're the people who are making browsers as powerful as browsers have become rapidly, right? But they're also this group of people that travels to conferences more than any other group of people I know, because as much as they are computer geeks behind a computer so often, they love going to see people and talking with other people. And I just think it's amazing that we can't subtract this from our culture. And so maybe finally, sorry. Tagging on to that, open source. So you have people creating these innovations on top of innovations on top of innovations, who love to fly to places and see other people, and then a lot of them are contributing to open source, if not exclusively, and myself included. And it's this amazing, I think, sort of ideal that exists in our world today, where people are working together to build something better for everyone. And that's incredible. I just want to end there and be like, isn't that awesome? But I think it's also part that these last few generations, we have a lot more leisure time than maybe other generations have. And I think it's incredible that we, in a lot of ways, choose to spend that free time building open source things and doing things together. And so I think that in the future, cities will be made more by the people, valuing people, and technology will always have a role in it, because technology is always going to get better. But technology will support the things that enable us to be our most human. And that is it.